We've got a founder here today, ladies and gentlemen. It's Tom Parmalee of Funeral Vision. You might know him from all his publications and media sources around in the funeral side of the industry. He's been around for quite some time. Tom, how are you doing today? What's going on?
I'm great. How are you, Michael? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, of course. Happy to have you. We'd love to know a little bit about your career and how it came to be that you founded Funeral Vision. If you've been around in funeral service the past couple of years, you're going to see his name and their publications all over the place. So, Tom, give us the rundown on how you got to be where you are today.
Yeah, sure. So, I'm a journalist by trade and, had worked at newspapers and had a really irregular schedule, where I worked
Yeah,
evenings and
sounds like a funeral
worked
director.
weekends. And, so I was just sort of looking for something with a little bit more of a steady schedule and started looking around and ended up finding a company, a trade publisher that served the funeral profession. And this was about almost 20 years ago.
Wow.
It's funny. I sort of hounded them and harassed them until I got an interview and landed the job and, just really liked it and had a pretty regular schedule and they gave me increasing responsibilities and just found that the funeral profession really embraced me and I
Mhm.
embraced it. And so I was lucky enough to stay at that company for about 15 years. And, a few years ago, I just decided that it was a bit of the time for a change and tried something new. Uh,
Sure.
got a different job and something that has nothing to do with funeral service at an association, and just knew I always was gonna come back to funeral service in some way.
Right.
And at the very beginning of 2023 or the end of 2022, I launched funeralvision.com. And
Hmm.
hopefully some folks out there are familiar with it already, but it's really just, a news information source for the profession
Yep.
where I profile individuals and companies and share news and, just try to keep the profession informed.
Absolutely. And it's imperative for all of us to stay in the know and to be informed as to what's going on the business side of things in the funeral industry. And what I love about what you do is that you keep everyone connected and in touch with things that back in the day we wouldn't really know much about, whether it was companies being bought or transactions happening, things like that. It's really important for us to be in the know so we can, as funeral professionals or funeral providers, we know what's going on a day-to-day basis, because a lot of that stuff years and years ago was very behind the scenes and it was a lot of smoke around it. And I think you've really brought that to light.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the profession, I think there's lots of great news sources out there, but I
Mhm.
thought there was room for one more, to bring a little bit of a different perspective, a different slant on things. I think being a one man show, as I am at funeralvision.com, I think that opens up a lot of avenues for me because, like it or not, if you work at a big media company, sometimes you have to pay a lot of people's salaries, and sometimes that can sort of affect your judgment in terms of who you cover or what companies you cover.
Sure.
Whereas I sort of have the liberty to, if I think there's something interesting or newsworthy or something that people should know about, um, I really am just doing this for the enjoyment and the excitement out of it. And I certainly don't want to lose money. But that's really not my priority or my driving force. So I think freedom
Uh,
allows me to bring a voice to the table and to showcase stories and articles that maybe people aren't finding somewhere else.
right. So what is your specialty, would you say? What is like your forte out of things that you bring to the table that you might not see elsewhere for anyone that doesn't read your stuff?
Well, I used to write a lot of investigative articles in
Hmm.
my former role, but funeralvision.com, it's something I do part time, and I love that kind of work. And I'm constantly getting tips about, oh, I should look into this or that because I think people aren't
Right.
familiar with that aspect of my background. But at Funeral
Right.
Vision, what I really focused on is profiles, just interesting companies, interesting individuals, people that might, have some business tips for other funeral home operators. Um,
Right.
and, and, I sort of pride myself on not being like a pay to play type marketplace, which I think some people are accustomed to. They're thinking,
Sure.
oh, if this person's not going to write something about my company because I'm not spending a lot of money with them, or I'm not exhibiting at conventions.
Right.
Because there's lots of people that are doing some interesting things, and they might
Yeah.
not have much of a budget. They might be a new player to the marketplace,
Mhm.
but they might still be worthy of being profiled and being talked about. So I'm trying to give a voice to some of those players and individuals that might not normally be featured. And I just love telling good stories when it comes
Yeah.
down to it. At the end of the day, if there's someone interesting, or someone doing something that we can all learn from, I'm right on that. I just love telling those stories.
Yeah, you have that inquisitive nature about you that goes and wants to find the newest thing and the best thing. What were like some of the things that you did, or some of the stories from back in the day that you would have done, maybe that a younger funeral director maybe didn't get the chance to know about, or to see, or to listen to?
Well, geez, I have covered such an array of stories over the years. I think what really sticks out to me though are really just the people that I've got to meet in this business, and get to know and to write about. As far as interesting stories over the years that I've covered, I think what sticks out to me again are the people of this business that I've got to know. Um, I had the opportunity to chat with Frank Stewart Jr., write an article on him of Stewart Enterprises, Mel Payne, Bob Waltrip, titans of the profession,
Yeah,
who just don't really talk to everybody, and you have to develop that level of trust to really get to know them.
absolutely.
I also got to say, just being on the ground floor, so to speak, of the growth of cremation over the years. So, if you
Sure.
think of what the cremation rate has done in just the past 20 years, from going from like, maybe 30% to now over 50%.
Yeah.
Um, and being there and reporting on all that and all the implications it has for funeral service, and how funeral homes have had to tweak and shift their business. That has just been, as a journalist, a fascinating topic to cover,
Right.
as well as just different options in the increase in personalization. Funeral
Yes.
homes now
It's
just
everything.
provide so many options to families, and rightfully so.
Mhm.
Um, and it's just been really cool to report on all the different options and personalization elements that different firms are bringing to the business.
Yeah, so you've seen a lot of changes, especially in the last 15 years. It's been night and day, and that's got to be such a cool transformation for you to see, and especially because you're trying to report on the betterment of our industry as a whole. Other people can use that as leverage at their own firm, and then everyone can sort of grow together. That's why I love doing this stuff too, is because you can really pick and choose different things that funeral homes are doing that they want to share, so the collective industry can grow as a whole and help more families in a better fashion. That's got to be so amazing for you to see that. Back in the day, were you in on the beginning saying like cremation is going to be a thing, like there's going to be some big old changes? And I'm sure that ruffled some feathers when you were first getting going.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in this business about 20 years now, so I think when I first joined, I think the realization was already dawning on people that cremation, it was heavily upticking each year, and people could sort of see the writing on the wall. Um, of course, there were still some folks that were dreaming of the good old days when you had a full casket funeral and a 2-day
Two nights,
viewing
two
for every
days.
family. But there have been, for some time, there have been a lot of forward thinking firms that have
Yeah,
been thinking, what's coming next and how is this going to affect the business.
yeah,
And they've been right on top of it, and it's been really interesting to be able to interact with those forward thinkers and to try to help everybody else.
right.
Of course, it's different if you have a competitor 5 miles down the street or whatnot. But I've also always been the thought of, let's share information with each other. Let's share what works with each other. Let's learn from each other. And because when funeral homes collectively do better and serve families better, that is only good for the profession. And, I really think if more people had that mindset of working together and not necessarily always competing, especially if they're separated by a certain geographic
Right,
distance,
right.
that just makes all the sense in the world to try to help your fellow funeral professional.
Absolutely. Have you noticed a shift, do you think, in the last 20 years in that respect, where people are not considering themselves competition with every single person? Because from what I gather from my father's generation, I'm a fourth generation actually funeral director myself. It seems like that has shifted a lot in the last 15 or so years, where everyone was competition, everyone was hiding secrets, and now people are opening up. Have you noticed that, or what can you comment about that?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I also think there's a certain realization that nothing is secret, right? I mean, you can have your competing funeral home secret shop your funeral home. They're calling your funeral home and perhaps under the guise of a family, and they're asking questions and seeing how you respond.
Yeah.
So, if you're really invested in trying to figure out what your competition is doing, you can probably find that out.
Yes.
And I also think a lot of firms know that if you have a higher level of transparency with the public, you're generally going to be in a better place in terms of selling your products and services. So,
Absolutely.
why hide it from your competitor down the road? I mean, just put it out there and do the best you can with it. That sort of ties into this whole question of whether or not funeral homes should post prices online or not,
Yes.
which I know is something that the FTC is considering.
Yeah.
I know of a lot of really good operators that already do that. I think the big question is, should funeral service, out of all the industries and all the professions out there,
Yeah.
be the only one with a rule and a law that requires them to post it online? And I think
Yeah.
that is a good question, because are they being treated unfairly in that respect? But with that said, I think there's lots of firms out there that believe in posting their prices online, and they think it makes sense, and they do it out of self-interest.
Yeah, it's such that it's that fine line, and I can absolutely see both sides of it. One part of the whole story is that if it does become a law, maybe does that make people more skeptical of what's going on inside the funeral industry? And people are like, why is this the only industry that they are? It is mandated by law to post pricing. But at the same time, I am all for transparency and knowing, like you were saying, Tom, that the family should know what's going on, and that's why it's best practices to share your story, to share what you're doing. Who cares if your competitor can see? Good for you. Try to do it as good as I'm doing. That's what I would say. But as far as the pricing, I think it would be great for families and great for the industry for transparency purposes. And I'd like to know your take on something that does concern me about it. And if you have any inside information as far as how pricing would actually look and work. Because right now it seems like there's a little bit of wiggle room as far as how you can post your pricing and making things seem a little bit cheaper in some way compared to other packages. And it's more about the interpretation of what the family is actually seeing on your website or on your
Yeah.
price list. So, what do you think about that aspect of it? Because
Well,
that part does scare me a bit.
I think that's a gripe that some funeral home owners have that, has some merit. The GPL can be hard to understand. You might need to have the family come in and walk them through it. And it might be hard to, it might be hard to really evaluate it just having it posted online. Um, but it's funny because I'll give you an example. Anyone who has kids out there probably has run into trying to find a daycare for their kid.
Right.
Um,
Yep.
you know, call a daycare or a preschool or some kind of school where you have to pay for childcare, and try to just get a straight price for weekly care on the phone.
No go.
It's virtually impossible. They're going to tell you, why don't you come in and do a site visit? And it just I think it's an interesting comparison, because I
Yeah.
haven't heard the federal government try to put a restriction on daycares and say, hey, you got to post your prices online.
Uh,
But here we are talking about funeral service. Now, I would say those daycares would probably be better off if they posted their prices, as long as their prices are competitive. And
yeah,
I think in most cases, the same probably holds true for funeral homes, to post some at least basic idea of pricing online.
right.
Um, it remains to be seen what the FTC does in regard to this, but I do think that funeral homes have an argument as to why should they be the only ones singled out here, especially when you look at the percentage of FTC complaints against funeral service and funeral homes,
Uh-huh.
and yet we still get so much negative attention in the
Yeah.
press. There was a recent article in the Wall Street Journal that I think many people in the profession are familiar with,
Yep.
in terms of trying to paint, the profession as a whole
Right.
with a bad brush. And, I just get disheartened when I see articles like that really sort of, try to paint the profession as a whole in a negative light.
Yeah. That is hard, and something that we're trying to shake. Like people like you and I, and a lot of people doing great work on a day-to-day basis. We're trying to shake that perception of people. And I'd love to get your take as a journalist. Do you think that is just because that is an engaging story and people are going to interact with it, and if it's a bit clickbaity online, so to speak, like people knowing that something's going on inside a funeral home, like that's engaging content? Do you think that's part of why it's doubled down, and that seems to be the focus of any story, unfortunately, about a funeral home?
Yeah, I think partly, publishers just know that the public might gravitate to a sordid story, and geez, a funeral home takes advantage of a family who their loved one just died of cancer or what have you, and it's easy to pile on. With that said, I mean, there's mistakes made in any industry, in any profession. There's always some bad apples. There's always things that could have been handled differently. But it does seem that when something goes wrong in funeral service, it seems like the mainstream press a lot of times is very quick to jump on, and pile on. And
Right.
I don't think that's, sometimes that might be fair, but not always.
Yeah, it's hard. Do you have any ideas on what we can do, like as a collective whole, to counteract that and to grow from it? Is there a way, or is there something that we can do?
I think, probably every single of the 20,000 odd funeral home rooftops in the United States could probably do a better job of sounding their own horn and promoting the good things that they do in the community,
Yeah,
on a wider level. And I know that's something you probably help firms with through your firm. But if you do something to help a charitable organization in your community, if you're giving out scholarships to people, to enter whatever field, it might not even be funeral service.
absolutely.
You should be active in your community and giving back, and promoting and not being shy about, letting people know who you are and what you do.
You have to showcase the work that you do behind the scenes and in front of the community. It's so imperative to do that. You can't be hiding behind what you do. Even if you do the best work imaginable, you have to think about it this way. Only the people that either attended the service or the family members are going to have any idea about that. Or if you're getting involved in your community, that's the same. It's the same thing. It's whoever sees that those people are going to know, hey, this so and so funeral home is very involved, or they're, like you said, Tom, like having this scholarship for people. You have to not be shy or embarrassed to showcase the work you do, because that's why we put in so much effort. Is like we should be reaping some sort of reward. And I know that's not exactly why we're doing these things. It's most of the time because we are very good-hearted, compassionate, and kind people. But there's nothing wrong with getting out there and displaying what you do for other people, because then they can resonate with that and they want to be like, hey, that funeral home is somewhere I could see having my loved one service at one day. And it will stick with people. There's no doubt about that.
To your point, where perhaps not everyone in the community might be aware of what you do, and only the people that see the service might really see how much you care.
Right.
That's one of the reasons I think live streaming might make sense for a lot of firms,
Definitely.
because you are able to bring in other people to see the type of care and service that you provide firsthand. And
Yeah.
not everyone can make it to the funeral, and having that as an option is one more touch point and also one more lead source. If
Yes.
you're collecting email addresses and names and whatnot, it might be another way to sort of grow market share and for people to see what you do without even giving them a sales pitch, just by virtue of them clicking a link and
Yeah.
seeing a service and seeing, hey, this funeral home, had a master of ceremonies that did a great job, or I like their facilities, or what have you.
Yeah, and let your work do the talking. Let it speak for you, and it just gets out there and it grows a bit more organically that way too. I'm totally with you. I think that's a great point and something that we all can be doing. I know we're very busy, but have a dedicated person on a funeral home staff that's doing that stuff for you. It just goes a long, long way, and it's all those little things that add up over time, and that's how you can find your way into more future business and in painting your picture in the way that you deserve it to be.
Absolutely.
What did your friends and family think? Like, so you were a journalist and then you like got into the funeral industry and profession. What did they think about that? And how was it for you at the beginning? Was there a big learning curve of trying to understand what was going on behind the scenes? How was that process for you? And how long did it take?
It's funny. It's almost like I was meant to get involved in this
Really?
business as a journalist. In college, one of my first jobs really was on the intern desk at the obituary desk at a newspaper.
No
And
kidding.
it was funny. I got that job. It's called the Trenton Times. And I remember, I went for the interview. And this is a sort of a funny story, but I didn't have a car at the time, but
Okay.
I got the interview and I'm like, okay. So I got dropped off by a friend who was waiting in the parking lot, interviewed with a guy named Peter Callis, great guy, no longer with us, unfortunately.
Oh,
But had an interview with him. And at the end of the interview, he said, well, when can you start? And I said, well, at any time. And of course, I'm sort of nervous. I don't have a car and trying to figure out how I'm going to get there. But then after the interview, he put me to work immediately, right after the interview.
you're
And
funny.
I was so afraid that they would not hire me if they realized I didn't have a car. And it was sort of hard to get into the building. You had to badge in and go through security and all this, that
Sure.
I left my friend who had driven me to the interview out there waiting
Oh,
for hours and hours. And I think he eventually left. I can't even remember how I got home. But
uh,
that was my start really in journalism, was
sure.
on the obituary desk of a newspaper. And
Wow.
at that time it was when newspapers were, they offered free obituaries. And over time we've seen that
It's changed.
transition quite a bit. Most places now you have to pay for the obituary. But you know just that background. And then in the newspaper business, I went on and became a police reporter. And as a police reporter, I covered the aftermath of the September 11th attacks, and sometimes had to interview families who had lost loved ones. And I covered the terrible accidents, murders, that had some kind of connection with death and funeral service, where I got to interface with funeral directors. And
Yeah.
I also struck up a friendship while working the obituary desk with a Trenton funeral director named Stanley Winowitz, who I wrote a profile of for a college class. And I talked about his service in Vietnam, and how death had just sort of always been this part of his life. A
Yeah.
really interesting guy, who I became friends with. So it's funny, because that article that I wrote for a college class, I ended up having published by Peggy at No Miss Publications,
Okay.
that does the funeral home and cemetery news that a lot of people are
Yes.
familiar with.
Of course. Sure.
And I used that clip. I used that clip to end up getting my job at the trade publisher where I stayed for 15 years.
Hilarious.
Um, so it's just sort of interesting when I look back on it, how, this really niche of an industry
Yeah.
that not many people think of, in terms of being a journalist, it has really been with me throughout my career in some way. And of course, I've written about other things and done a lot of different types of writing, but this has always been sort of a constant. And I've had a lot of people ask me, they sort of think I'm a licensed funeral director, and I have to tell them, no, 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 I'm not a licensed funeral director. I know a lot about funeral service,
Yeah.
and I've gone to a lot of conventions and heard a lot of people speak, but I am not a licensed funeral director. And just I'm a journalist by background and training.
Yeah, that's really cool. What is your writing process like? Do you wake up in the morning and you grind out work, or do you sort of let things marinate in your mind and then it flows? I'd be very interested to know how that works for you on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm one of those guys that don't have to really outline stuff. You have a lot of planners who outline things and
Sure.
plan. And a lot of times, I'll be interviewing somebody and they'll say something and I'll know that's the beginning of the article, right? Like, and I might be taking notes and I'll have to very quickly either put it in a large font or bold it or underline it or something,
Yep.
because I just know right when they say it, that's how to start the article. And I'm really big with the beginnings of articles, transitions.
Yep.
I just think those are so important as a writer. I really look at writing as a puzzle, right? Where you
Yeah.
just have to, you might have some pieces over here, some pieces over there, and you have to figure out how they all connect together.
Yeah.
And sometimes you might have some pieces and you figure out they're good pieces, but they don't belong to this puzzle. They're a different story. They're a different article altogether. And you
Sure.
just sort of maybe have to set that aside for another time. Um,
Yeah.
but I've coached a lot of, younger writers throughout the years. And I guess the big beef, so to speak, that I have with a lot of younger writers or people that are just sort of starting off in the business is
It's
they,
ChatGPT.
they think their first draft is the final draft, right?
Yeah.
Like, you put everything on paper, but you have to go back and rearrange things sometimes and cut some stuff out.
Yep.
It's not a matter of trying to write the longest article. It's a matter of trying to write the most interesting article. And that's how my process works. I'm fortunate to be one of those people that I can just get in front of a keyboard a lot of times and just start typing, because I just have an idea in my mind without writing it down, how the story should flow and what should be the beginning and what should be the end. And then it's just a matter of fine tuning it. Um, and, and a lot of times, I just think some folks with their writing, they just don't fine tune it. They have everything there, they have all the pieces there, but it's a matter of just, you got to rearrange things sometimes
Yeah.
and just do a little bit more work on it.
Yeah, that's really cool and interesting about, the younger generation of writers coming in, that it's a little bit more challenging, and maybe that's because everything is so immediate and fast now that they don't want to take the time to be editing and making the versions and to improve it. That's very interesting. I myself do love writing. I've read a bunch of books on copywriting and things like that, for our emails and for on the marketing side of things. Like I love David Ogilvy, like he's my favorite. But you hit on the head. One of my favorite points is, and this is very niche. This is very unrelated to our funeral directors. Unless you're writing letters to your families and obituaries, that'll hit too. But it's that punch at the beginning of an article or what, chapter, whatever it might be, and leading them down that slope. So like getting them to read those first couple sentences, and then that sort of just encourages them down the flow. Well, what are your thoughts on that sort of stuff? And is there anything that you do think does pertain to our funeral directors or funeral homeowners? Because I'm sure there are some connections we can make there.
You want to talk to the reader and just, think that you're talking to one person. And I think that can always help if you're trying to have a conversation, and focus on, focus on benefits, not features. Don't just try to give statistics. Focus on what you're doing, how it helps families. What are the
Yeah.
benefits? I remember, at one point someone gave me like a couple different colored highlighters earlier in my career, and they said, okay, any type of sales letter or promotional marketing piece you write, with the pink highlighter, highlight the description, and with the orange highlighter, highlight the benefits,
Okay.
how it helps people. And you'd want a lot more orange than the other color,
Ah,
because that would resonate with people, because, you're sort of explaining what you do and how it helps them. Um,
yeah.
you don't say buy from me. You have to show what are the benefits of buying from you. And if you
Right.
can do that, in terms of selling and marketing and that type of copywriting,
Mhm.
you're in a much better position. Um,
Ooh, that's
but I mean, I like experimenting, trying new things. I mean, there's an article I wrote for Funeral Vision about Larry Stewart Jr., who a lot of people knew. And sometimes I get these crazy ideas, and I just had this funny idea about how to introduce the story that I thought went along with Larry's personality. If you know Larry, he's like 6'5", and he's just he just has this sort of superhero vibe about him. I felt a little uncomfortable about publishing it without getting his okay. So that was one of those rare instances where, I wrote the first few drafts of the story, and normally I never share what I write with people. I just have at it and publish it, and and try to do the best I can. But in that instance, I actually, I shot Larry an email and said, "Hey, Larry, I'm thinking about starting the article off like this," and hopefully people can check out the story and just Google it or find it on my site. But I had a little fun with the first few paragraphs, and Larry was a great sport about it and said, he said, "Oh, that's a little bit different, but okay, go ahead." And so even after all these years, I'm trying new things when it comes to writing. Some things work, some things don't, and you just are always constantly trying to learn what works and how you can do better.
Oh, that's really good. And some of that stuff is going to hit too, like for our funeral directors when I think we think about all of the what we're bringing to the table, like the assets or what they're going to get. When really what you're saying, Tom, is we should be talking about the benefit that that is providing to them, to that person, and to their family. Because we can talk about, oh, your cremation comes with, this and that, or your funeral comes with this, and that really when we should be talking about our packages, or if someone is price shopping on the phone, is what is the family going to be get, what is that person going to be get, what they're going to get from your services. Like, well, what does it do for them, as opposed to what you provide. What are some of those things that you think would go a long way, if you have any ideas for when you're talking with a family specifically?
I mean, any kind of personal stories, testimonials.
Ooh,
If you can get someone, on camera or something, and saying like how before the service they couldn't eat, they couldn't have dinner, they couldn't sleep, and then after working with your caring staff, they were able to get a good night's sleep at night. They were able to eat again. They were
yeah,
able to smile again. Or they, after attending your grief support group, they found others who were in the same situation as them. um, any kind of personal stories where
yeah,
you can have your customers sharing with people, either on video or in written words,
yeah,
how you were able to help them. I think that will resonate a lot more with you just saying, "Hey, we're 49.95, and that's $1,000 less than the competitor down the road.
right,
Buy from us." I mean,
right,
you have to do what you can to show people how you've helped people in the community, how you've helped other people deal with their grief, how you've helped other people pre-plan to take the burden away from loved ones, and why people think
yes,
that's important. Maybe it's someone saying that, geez, when my mom died, I was a wreck, and yet I still had to pull myself together and plan a funeral and
yeah,
figure all this stuff out when I was in this terrible emotional state. But I went to Smith Funeral Home,
yeah,
and took care of my own prearrangements so my children wouldn't have to be in that same situation. And gosh, now I feel so much better. Um, you know,
yeah,
just coming up with features that resonate with people, where you can show how you're helping people, and not just spouting and telling them why they should come to you, but showing them why.
Yes, show them why, lead with stories, and connect with the emotional level. It's a very emotional decision, and they need to be connecting with you on that level. And I think that something like 60 to 80% of people, they are more inclined to continue on with someone that is appealing to the emotion. Some people are more like facts, and that's the way they get them moving. But more than half of the population is going to be more triggered in the positive way or negative way, I guess, for some different aspects, but with the emotional side of things. So showing that story and displaying it rather than just like talking at you or saying my funeral home's been around since 1908, like stuff like that. No, no, no. That's not what's going to make a family connect with you. You have to connect with your story, with your personality, and on a one-to-one level, which is another thing that I love that you said, Tom, there too.
Yep, absolutely. Yep,
That's
I
great.
agree.
So last couple little things. I saw that you might be going down a job board sort of type of deal with Funeral Vision. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so there's two things I would love to mention. First, the jobs engine, which I got to give a shout out to Welton Hong and his team for helping create it. He helped me out a lot with that. But I think the profession has a bit of a staffing crisis, and
It does.
it's really hard to find people. And I also noticed there are some jobs listing services out there, but a lot of them charge quite a bit. And I just thought, hey, if I'm a funeral home, am I really going to want to spend $500, $600 to post a job ad? And I thought with Funeral Vision we could bring out something and offer, a jobs listing, a jobs engine service at a much better price point. And we already have some built-in traffic, some passive job seekers, and those a lot of times are really good candidates. And so, we're just rolling it out. It's sort of in the beta phase where I'm trying to work out the
Sure.
kinks. I think we have a really attractive price point, and hopefully we can help the profession and fill that need and hit some people. And I realize the jobs problem is a multi-layered problem. I
Right.
mean, there's no one solution. I
Yeah.
can't magically solve the problem, but I can do what I can with the platform that I have. And so that's how I'm looking at it. I'm just trying to do that little part that I can to help connect job seekers with employers, and also to try to hit those people that might not even really be actively seeking a new job, because a lot of times those people, they're open to a change if you put it in front of them.
Opportunity.
So
Yeah.
um and the other thing I would love to mention is I'm teaming up with Sympathy Brands on an event called Funeral IQ, and that's going to be September 20th at the Live Casino and Hotel in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And we have some great speakers lined up for the program. If you visit funeraliq.org, or click on the events tab on funeralvision.com, you can see some more information about that.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. So especially if you're in the Northeast up there, you gotta get on that. There's no doubt about it. And I'm totally with you 100%. There is an issue with the jobs in our profession, and it is multi-layered. It has to do with the shortage, but also not having the ease of being able to connect and not having a one-centered platform. So hopefully what you're doing there is going to make a big difference in that way at a price that it's going to be more attainable for the smaller funeral home is what I would say.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the pricing, I'll throw it out there, is it's $99 for 30 days or 60 days for 149. So I think that's, a really attractive price point for folks that might be paying, significantly more elsewhere. And Funeral Vision continues to grow traffic month over month. And that's really where my focus is.
Yeah,
And people are always surprised when they ask me, oh, send me a media kit or this or that. And or they're surprised, that I'm not hounding various companies to advertise on the
right.
site. But it really is because I am in the stage of simply trying to provide value and build an audience. And,
Yeah,
of course, down the line, hopefully I'll make a little bit of, ancillary revenue and put that in my pocket. because just like funeral homes, we all deserve to be rewarded for our hard work and efforts. It's not a crime to try to make money at the end of the day. So, but that's not my focus. I plan to be here for the long game. I plan to stick around. And so, I'm really looking at 3 years out, 5 years out. And for
Yeah.
the next couple years, my focus is not on trying to put dollars in my pocket. My focus is on trying to increase my relevance, build a larger audience, provide value so I get more visitors to the site. And so, so at the end of the day, if you go to the NFDA convention or ICCFA, and perhaps now 1 out of 5 or 6 people have heard of funeralvision.com.
Yeah.
I hope 4 or 5 years from now, it's 8 out of 10 people have heard about it. And that's where my focus is, and trying. And I know the only way I'm going to get there is to provide value to the visitors.
Yeah.
Not dumb it down with sales pitches, but to provide value, to provide good content. And so that's what I'm trying to do at funeralvision.com.
Well, you provided us value today. I'll say that you gave us some great knowledge and things that we can use, and things that we don't maybe necessarily talk about too much on a day-to-day basis, but imperative use for our funeral homes. And you got to continue to follow Tom and all the stuff that he's putting out there, so that way you can get value that you can use on a day-to-day basis. We appreciate you taking the time to join us, sharing your story, and we wish you all the best, and hopefully you keep rocking and rolling.
No, likewise, and keep doing all the great things you're doing. I know you have a foundation that helps people with pregnancy loss, and I got to cover that on funeralvision.com and
Love
talk
it.
a little bit about the really great stuff that you're doing. So keep doing what you're doing, and keep up the great work on your end.
I appreciate that.